Okay, everybody. Uh-oh. So somehow I can't get rid of my intro. Okay, everybody. So somehow I can't get rid of my intro. Okay, everybody. So somehow I can't get rid of my intro. Okay. Okay, I think I got that sorted out. Hey, this is what happens when you have too many browsers open, one of which includes the live broadcast that you're doing right now. So this is, as you probably have guessed, the first Voicebot Live. So we're going to be going through a little bit of learning process as we go through this. But I have a great show for you today. We're really excited to do this. One of the things we heard last year was people are sort of getting sick of some of the online shows and some of the online events. And so we tried to figure out what would be a format that would help be educational, fun, and really drive some really interesting discussion. And so that's what we have for you today. Before we get started, I want to do a quick, go this way, a quick thank you to Cerence, our sponsor for this, for the first episode of Voicebot Live. Cerence, as many of you know, they're the leading provider of voice assistants in automotive, and they've moved into some other areas as well. So that's going to be great. Now, next up, we have Adam Chire and Ron Crone. You're going to meet them in just a moment. We have some juicy new data that we haven't published before, so that'll be really fun. We're going to have the big question that we teed up that we're going to talk about in terms of maybe the most pressing question today that a lot of people in this industry are thinking about. We also have an iPad that we're going to give away, which will be awesome. But before we bring Adam out, so he's going to be our first guest, will be up in just a moment. Once we bring him up from the green room, that will be a great session. Now, I have to pull up now my, 1 second. I have a video for you, and it's just a second here, that I just had live. But I guess I shut it down when let's see. Oh, you know what? I have another one we can use. This one's ready. Maybe you've seen this, maybe you haven't, but let's get it rolling.
Open door.
Door open.
Radio on.
Playing radio.
And do lights.
Lights on.
Protein shake.
Making protein shake.
Okay, that was fun. I think that's one of the ones that I always enjoy showing to people when we think about how voice has been impacting everybody's lives, and sometimes humorously. Adam Chire, welcome to Voicebot Live.
Thanks, Brett. Glad to be here.
All right, my very first guest. I guess, why don't you give the 20-second introduction of your background for the people who might not have come across you in the past?
Sure. I'm best known as the co-founder of Siri, the technical co-founder of Siri, which sold to Apple. It was a startup. Many people don't know that. After staying 2.5 years at Apple, I co-founded Viv Labs, kind of a next generation Siri, which we sold to Samsung and now powers the Bixby ecosystem. And before that, I've been doing voice assistants all the way back till the early 90s.
That's right. And a lot of other things in between. I remember we came across each other at one point during the e-commerce revolution around 99, 2000, which was fun. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, I believe you last summer you left Samsung and sort of moved on, which makes sense. Maybe it's semi-retirement. Although you're very active, I know there is no retirement for Adam Shire. I heard maybe you might have been writing a play, or was it a screenplay? What was it?
Yeah, so one of my big hobbies is magic. So I see a lot of parallels between entrepreneurship and magicians. I say that both an entrepreneur and a magician need to imagine an impossible future. If it doesn't, if it exists already, don't start a company to do it.
Right.
If it exists, don't. It's not a magic trick. But once you have an impossible future, you work your way backwards and make the science and math work out so that it can be real. So magic's a big hobby. I produced and helped write a theater show, destined for kind of a Broadway-like audience. Unfortunately, I picked the wrong year to do that, since all live shows are shut down.
True.
But I think when it comes out, hopefully, maybe not this year, but perhaps the next year, I think it'll be something unlike anything anyone's seen. The idea is to really, people walk into the room and they think they know how the universe works.
Right.
And when you walk out, it's not a magic show, it's something different. But the idea is that maybe I don't understand the world quite the way that I thought I did. It stretches your beliefs and your understandings of what's possible.
Okay. Maybe kind of the way Siri stretched a lot of people's belief of what you can do with computing and how we can interact with digital services.
Absolutely. 20 years ago, I mean, if you had said I'd have a device in my pocket that knows where I am and who I am, and that you can just talk to naturally and it'll talk back to you and actually perform actions on your behalf, people would have said that's a magic trick. But now, today, it's science, and it's in everyone's pocket.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny too, because we think about Siri and your journey there over the last decade and a half. But I remember sitting down with you a couple of years ago at the Samsung event where you're launching the new Bixby. And I believe you told me at the time, it's recorded in our podcast. It's episode 69 for those of you who want to check it out. I believe you told me it was 25 years ago that week that you had demoed your first voice assistant, which would have been 1993, I think.
That's the one. Absolutely. So my first version of Siri, and this really set me off on the quest, was before I saw a web browser. So I said, someday there will be content and services on computers spread around the world, and we're going to need some interface to access them and interact with them. At the time, we had, FTP and WASE servers and a lot of typed consoles. But I built an assistant that ran on a little device like an iPad that had a graphical interface you could click on, but you could also speak to it and you could draw. So it was a pen voice multimodal interface. And as new services connected anywhere on the web, much like a website, you could now talk to those services individually, or you could describe a task that would then delegate to multiple services around the web. And services who didn't know about each other would now start working together to help the user get the job done. So that was my vision, really Siri as an internet. And all along the way, through probably 50 or more voice assistants, including Siri and Bixby, I've been trying to creep ever closer to that first prototype and vision. We got pretty close with Bixby, with an open ecosystem of third-party developers, but there's still more to do, obviously.
Sure, I understand. If I think about it, what you just said, I guess you also invented the tablet.
We didn't make the hardware. There was this really cool company called Dauphin that had this early iPad-like tablet that we could buy. They didn't sell a lot of them, but I thought it was fantastic.
Outstanding. And I understand you've also been busy with a new award. I guess it's the Oscars of online magic.
Yeah, I think this is COVID times. So since for my hobby, I think I've seen more virtual magic shows than any living human. So I saw over 130 virtual magic shows last year. I think any magician doesn't have the time because they have to work on their craft.
Right.
Any normal person isn't as obsessed as I am. So I actually came up with what I called the Adam Awards. It actually went viral in the magic community for a while, but I created different categories or elements of what makes a great virtual performance and show. And actually there's a lot in common with magic shows and this type of show. And then I gave award winners for each category so that magicians or virtual performers could have a scorecard of, how good am I at interacting with the camera? How good am I at introductions? How good am I at surprise ending, etc. And then if they didn't have ideas about how to improve, I had the award winners. They could go watch someone else's show and just get an idea of someone who's doing that category really well. So that was the Adam Awards for Virtual Magic last year.
Got it. And I've actually seen you do that scorecard for some voice assistants that are out there too. So it'd probably be interesting at some point to get your update. I think it would probably be a good time to bring in our next guest, Ron Crone. Ron, thank you for joining us today. Why don't we start with you giving us a little intro on your background?
Thank you, Brett. Hi, Adam. I'm an entrepreneur, and maybe not a serial entrepreneur. I don't know how many attempts it takes to call yourself a serial entrepreneur, but I've done a few. And the origin is I found my way to a research organization in Menlo Park, California in 1993. And I was introduced to the speech recognition research laboratory there. I was a guy without a garage and the ability to invent anything, but in search of a technology. And I found the speech recognition lab and a bunch of really great entrepreneurial thinkers, but really true technologists, Hein Mervite, Mike Cohn, and Peter Monaco, among many others there. And smelled a desire and an opportunity to start a company. So that's more or less the origin story of Nuance. What's remarkable about this gathering today is that, only after being there a short time did we get invited to walk across the hallway in Building E at SRI from the speech recognition lab to the AI lab, where a young research guy named Adam Shire was doing a multimodal services aggregation product with a voice interface. So I met Adam kind of in the early days and feel fortunate to have watched the progress of multimodal services based systems from the beginning, really.
I think I was your first customer in a sense, Ron, because I remember back when the software was called Decipher, it was only for research scientists. And I said, no, I need an API. I want to build things with this.
Right.
And literally Peter Monaco and some of those others built the first documented API to their platform and tools. And then you guys took this and started a company and did amazing things with it. But I felt like I was the first one saying, I'm a user. I want to consume speech services. And really push the research group to actually delivering a documented, working platform that eventually you guys commercialized, which was great.
The thing that unifies entrepreneurs and resonates for me now is conviction around a vision. In those days, you often heard that speech recognition was the technology of the future and always would be. And pushing through the history to make something commercially viable is really not just the technological accomplishment, but the entrepreneurial accomplishment, I would say.
Yeah, well, that's great. So Ron, why don't you tell people, so you spent about a decade and a half building Nuance and taking it public and getting it established. Maybe you could just make a quick comment on essentially what you deployed into the market there that helped you grow so quickly. I think it went public in 2000. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. And then what you've been doing for the last 5 years or so in the venture capital industry.
Wow, those are two opposite ends of the bookshelf. The breakthrough application for speech technology at scale over the telephone was our deployment of a stock quote system for Charles Schwab. And that proved that large vocabulary, speaker independent speech recognition technology over the telephone could work to a degree of accuracy that made it usable for the market, for the average person. Just instead of calling their broker, they'd get a stock quote by talking to the automated system. And I'm pretty confident that system's still alive today. There's certainly other voice services that Schwab uses. In the last period of time, I found some of my entrepreneurial enthusiasm has taken me to the other side of the table, where I'm making venture investments as part of an operating group in the brand marketing space. So quite relevant to some of the topics that you've been delivering research on, Brett, about how brands use media and new forms of content to bring their marketing messages. Basically, how brands do technology to market better, faster, and cheaper. I'm part of a group called You and Mr. Jones, and we've made about 25 venture investments in the last 5 years. So it's quite an interesting perspective to be on the investor side at scale versus the entrepreneurial side, doing one at a time, let's say.
Right. Well, 25 investments, but also just raised a big new fund. So things must be going pretty well.
Well, You and Mr. Jones invests out of its own balance sheet. So the fundraising is not a discrete fund, but yes, You and Mr. Jones has done well and just closed a next round financing of about $280 million.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So I'm sure there's a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience today who might be thinking about that. So let's talk about sort of our first segment here that I want to get your response on. And this is our data drop. So this is data that we haven't publicly put out there before. We have one that's in a research report, another which is going to be coming in an upcoming research report. But what I wanted to do first is talk to you a little bit about the demand side. And these are going to be U.S. numbers, just to get everyone perspective. U.S. tends to be a couple years ahead of most of the other Western nations, and then maybe a little bit further ahead some of the others. There's some variance in there, but that's a good place to start. We'll look at data like that maybe on a future episode. But let's look at the U.S. first, and I want to get your reaction to these. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about consumer device adoption. So we pulled this data in October. The numbers have gone up a little bit since the end of the year, but this is roughly where we are today at the end of 2020, or where we were at the end of 2020 in terms of smartphones, smart home, hearables, and smart speakers. And one of the interesting things about this is what you're going to see is that about 65% of smartphones, smartphone owners have used a voice assistant of some type. So they've got that experience. About the same percentage, a little bit higher of smart home, or excuse me, a little bit lower of smart home. 60% of smart home owners have used some sort of voice system to control the smart home. Hearables, we're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 million or so that have used those. So what we have here on the consumer side is we have access to a lot of devices where voice assistants are available today. And this is quite a different story than back in 2010, Adam.
Absolutely. It's I presume smart TVs go under the smart home category. Yeah, so it is a completely different landscape. I mean, back then, there were some online services like, back in the 2000s, like Charles Schwab or some voice. Google came out with Google 411 for a while, so you could do dialing over the phone, things like that, but very narrow specific services. There were dictation platforms, but the voice assistant didn't really start to grow, I think, into the early, until 2011 or so when Siri came out, and it really started to go mainstream with some excellent marketing from Apple and a lot of enthusiasm. But since then, it's been spreading everywhere. One thing I'm curious about, and I don't know if you have insight into this, is the growth. I mean, when I look at the smart home category, and particularly smart TVs, I've seen some numbers of that is one of the largest growing areas of voice assistance. And I think the potential there is enormous as well. So, I think different people use the devices in different ways. I think it is becoming more widespread. I think all of the devices are, not using assistants. The usage can still go way up.
Right.
For the potential of users' consumption of the services offered by the assistants. I think it is a little bit different, the types of things people do per device. But there's a lot of, I'm excited to watch how things evolve and how users get more comfortable on these devices for which use cases over time.
Yeah. Well, and actually, just to give you to add a little bit of data here. So a year ago, Google announced that they had 500 million monthly active users on Google Assistant. We've seen numbers around the 400 million range for Apple. Samsung, I think, is up over 200 million. Alexa is sort of between that 100 and 200 million range. So, and then if you look at like Baidu and some of the Chinese manufacturers, we're talking about somewhere around 3 billion people worldwide have access to devices with a voice assistant readily available. And then that's expanding significantly as it's being added to feature phones. And so one of the things we always think about with new technologies is their distribution. And I know that was a really important thing for Siri early on. So you had the app in the App Store, the iOS App Store was really important for you to get that in the hands of users. Otherwise, the question was, how would you get to market?
Absolutely. And that was a big factor of why did we sell our cool assistant technology startup to a company like Apple. We actually turned down Steve's offer when he first met with us, and we wanted to go it alone, and that's a whole nother story. But I think we made the right choice of joining, because with a snap of a finger, Samsung, for instance, has a 1 billion device footprint.
Right.
And not every device is ready for a voice assistant, but a whole lot of them are. So if you can distribute that technology through a company like an Apple or a Samsung, that really helps make an impact in the world. And that as an entrepreneur was very appealing to me.
Wasn't the transition also that by doing a deal with Apple, it was addressable at the home screen versus you had to open up the Siri app, with an icon on a screen before you could start using it prior to the Apple?
Absolutely. The button is huge, right? If you can be the button, the hardware button on the phone, and Apple did this, Samsung did this for a while with, Bixby button. If you have a remote control on a TV, that button is gold, right? That's where the usage is coming in. And it's hard for a third party service or a startup to get into a button like that. So yeah,
push to talk is underrated, I think, or underappreciated. How useful that is.
Or how about just Hey Siri?
Okay.
Be careful! Don't activate everyone's device. All right, Rod. Well, let me transition to another chart that I wanted to ask you about first. And Andrew, I think you'll need to advance that. And this is marketer voice AI priorities. Now, this data has not been seen by anyone other than Andrew and I, because this is a report that's going to come out later this week around about marketer adoption of voice AI technologies. And just to tee this up so people understand what's going on here, one of the questions we asked marketers was not just whether they thought voice was something that was useful or whether they deployed some voice AI capability, but to the extent that they believe it's important to have a voice presence out in the market, what surfaces do they think are most important to have that voice presence on? Is it okay just to be on a smartphone? Or maybe you want to focus on the car, all these other types of things. And what you see here is two different things. That dark red or maroon color, that's all marketers. So we had people all the way from sub 100 person employees up to, in this case, the pink, which is just the 500 and over employees. So that includes everyone up to tens of thousands of employees, with the understanding that marketers have different ideas or different objectives sometimes that's correlated with their scale. And what you'll see is smartphones are number one for sure for all, and even with the 500 plus employees for consumer brands. But then we see a little bit of difference when we get to the larger organizations where like smart speakers all of a sudden become much more important. Smart TVs become important. We still see the same general order, but there's some variance in there. And Ron, you work on that side of the aisle. You're thinking about marketers a lot in your investment business. Yeah, tell me what you thought of when you saw these data here today.
Well, I think I take the approach that helps understand what could be going on or what is going on from the bifurcation or the separation of services that might be promoted or offered by a brand versus marketing that the brand uses to advance its brand awareness or its presence in the market and its interface to consumers. And the latter usually occurs in the context of media of some form. So what gets interesting is if you think about smart speakers, for example, I think it's the most interesting category. It's now as big as smartphones, at least among brands that have more than 500 employees, meaning they have probably bigger advertising budgets. They're more about consumer brand marketing. The question becomes: is the smart speaker a form of media that we care to have in our lives, in our homes, or wherever that smart speaker is? Typically it's home, I'm sure. And I think that's sort of an unresolved question. If I'm listening to Spotify, maybe even Spotify is going to serve up some commercials or some advertising. But if I'm just trying to do something useful with my Alexa, smart speaker, I don't know that I want to hear an ad at that point before I get the functional thing done. So again, back to the first point, media versus services. I think probably it would be interesting to break this out and see how they're thinking about it. So services might be order a Domino's pizza on your smart speaker, but not necessarily a promotional, content piece that is about the brand. But I guess the other thing I take away is smart speakers are a big category from the point of view of where brands are focused, because it seems like it's caught up to smartphones. If I'm reading this right, the brands want to be present in that space to the same degree they're present on mobile devices. And when you think about you and Mr. Jones and where we see the world, I mean, it's clearly moved from desktop or laptop computing devices to mobile. The brands figured that out over the last decade or so. So it kind of looks like we're all in the process of figuring that out relative to smart speakers. Also, is that a place where you're going to invest and build your brand and have a relationship with the consumer?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. The other thing I'll just point out is there is interest in advertising through these channels because it's a new touch point in the home. It's a way to reach people in a place where you couldn't reach them before unless there was television or maybe they're playing some streaming music service, radio. So there's definitely interest there. But this is specific. This data is specifically about people who want to have some sort of voice interactive presence. That is, they've created a capsule in Bixby or a skill in Alexa, an action in Google, or maybe they've had their own custom assistant that they've built and deployed through an application that they have available on the web or in mobile or through a specific device. So for them, they're thinking we're going to invest in this space so that we can have voice interactivity with our customers or prospective customers.
But that's what I'm calling a service. No, would you distinguish that?
Yeah. No, I agree. I just wanted to clarify for the listeners that this is service, and there is interest on the advertising side, but that's a completely different decision set. What we're looking at is where are people going to invest in a new initiative, a new channel, a new way to engage, as opposed to a different way to serve media, promotional media that they've had in the past. Okay. So that was our data dump. I hope a lot of the people like that. I know there's a lot of people here who are screenshotting. So Adam, I'm going to start with you, and I keep knocking my cord out here. I'm going to start with you on our question. So this is really why I wanted you both here. So it's great to talk about the data, get a little sense of what's going on today. But I really want to take a look forward. And Adam, you and I have had this conversation recently, but also in the past. Ron, you and I have talked about it as well. So this this is perfect. You guys have been in the industry close to 30 years, we'll say. It's coming up on that. There's a lot of discussion today about whether maybe voice is plateaued or maybe it's gone as far as it can go. Some people even say we're in a voice winter. I'm not necessarily subscribed to any of those things. I think it depends on what you're looking at and what you define the boundaries are of the industry. But I think there's a general consensus that voice assistants in particular could be much more than they are today. That we've sort of scratched the surface. We've got a lot of awareness. We have distribution. We just saw that. There aren't a lot of devices. We have the supply side, the marketers saying, and content creators say, yeah, I want to use this to reach them. But then there's this question about what it's going to be going forward. Is it going to just be a tool, or is it going to be something more than that? So the question to you can start this off, Adam. What's keeping voice AI from becoming the next great computing platform?
Thanks, Brett. That's a great question. I mean, I've had, as I mentioned, in 1993, I imagined I'll call it a voice-enabled interface as a paradigm as big as the web, or ultimately as big as mobile became. I mean, these are two ecosystems where the world's developers are publishing the services, right? If the web were just websites created by Google, or if mobile just was apps developed by Apple, I don't think mobile and web would have been the phenomenon that they are. But today, one of the big things is that the third-party ecosystem within the voice space, all of those services that Ron was talking about, it's not really a level playing field in a number of dimensions. And I think it needs to be. I really believe that voice as a paradigm needs to be something akin to a browser, something akin to, Microsoft Windows when it first came out, which is that there are common functionalities that are used across every assistant. When I opened up a dialog box in Microsoft Windows back when GUIs first came out, I knew that Escape would close the box, that Alt F would open up the file menu on whatever application I was using. It gave me power and comfort. One problem with voice assistants is if it fragments and everyone does their own voice assistant, and instead of having one assistant, you have 100,000 with different design styles, with different capabilities, you don't really know, is this going to work, right? And people are afraid to feel stupid. Everyone is afraid to feel stupid. So with a voice interface, they work pretty well if you stay within the boundaries of what they're designed for. And so how do people do it? Some people will do very directed dialogues. Like the old days, we used to have voice XML, it'd say, please welcome, say weather, sports, movies, traffic now. Please say the name of your city and state now. It's not conversation in a natural way, because you have to direct and move through this tree of options. That's one way people used to do it. I don't think that'll ever take off. The other way is you can say what you want, but what are the boundaries of what I can say? And if I ask something outside of a boundary, I'm going to fail and feel bad. So what I would say is my approach to creating a scalable ecosystem, my views on creating a scalable ecosystem is we need a platform that every third-party developer can join in. They will have a level playing field. So today, most assistants come with the built-ins, and third parties are lesser than. We need to have a system that every service, whether it's built by the main voice provider or by a third party, can compete equally and levelly. That's often not the case. We need good discovery capabilities so people can, for any service they interact with, know how to discover what are the boundaries of an assistant. So these are some of the things. I think if we fragment too much, we won't get there. We won't get to the voice assistant that we all want. What we need is a common platform that that gives those dialog box-like capabilities. If I say, 3 Thursdays from now, well, if it works in one service, it should work in the other service as well. Like, I need confidence because language is horizontal. Domains are vertical and specific, but I need those horizontal components to exist, to empower the user and give them confidence that they can achieve things and they will be successful, and that will expand their capabilities going out. So those are a few of my opinions about what's kind of missing in today's voice developer ecosystem.
Okay, so it sounds like what you might be saying is that we would be better off if one company, monopoly, or two companies, duopoly, actually controlled this, because then we would have that consistency baked in.
That's right. I think every paradigm, at a paradigm scale, there's usually a major and a minor. So there was, the PC with Windows, and then there was the Mac. There was Internet Explorer, and then there was Netscape. There was iPhone, and then there was Android. And people tend to gravitate towards one of these brands. And once you know how to use the iPhone, for instance, or Android experience, you're comfortable there. You know how it works. You know how it feels. And no matter which app that you create, or that you access, you will know, how do I do search on this operating system? How do I move back or go to the home screen or clear conversation? So there needs to be, I think, a common framework of tools to allow an end consumer like me that, if I hit a back button on my browser, I know what's going to happen. If I click on a link, do I click once or is it a double click? I should know that and be confident with that. We need that analog. And I don't think any one individual, brand, I don't want to take all the time for 100,000 services to learn, how does this service work? How does that service work? I don't want 100,000 different assistants. I want one assistant that I'm comfortable with, that I can ask requests using my favorite brands. I like this provider, not that provider.
Okay.
But I need that commonality and that horizontal capability that makes it comfortable to access those vertical services like the web did, like Windows did, like mobile did. And I think that's largely missing in today's voice world.
And so in your view is that, just to be clear, and I'm going to pass this to Ron, you can correct me before I pass it to Ron, is that we would be better off if it was really consolidated in one or two key players, because then all those UX consistencies and affordances would be common by design.
Well, it needs to be the perfect marriage between the enabler and the brands, right? Google isn't the website, but it's the way that allows an end user to get to that website in a confident way. That's what allowed the web to take off. Imagine the web if there were only Yahoo bookmarks back in the day, right? It would not be the web. Like, the search engine played a role that gave to all of the companies in the world, the usage, the access. And it's the same thing. Yes, I think there needs to be an enabler. When you say consolidator, to me, that makes it seem like,
okay, a winner.
Consolidator owns everything. But I do believe there needs to be a horizontal layer of services around discovery, around, like, for instance, with what we tried with Bixby, every time the assistant would ask the user a question, the user could be confident that machine learning was being applied, and that if the user responded consistently, it would not ask that question anymore.
Right.
It would infer, no matter which developer, domain, how they did it. That was a built-in platform level capability. And a user can now say, oh, this is a service that this is how the assistant works. And if it ever guesses wrong and I want to go outside, here's where I go to change that inferred preference, right?
Got it.
These horizontal enablers, I think, are important because it makes to the user feels like, I know how to use, a web browser. I know how to use an iPhone. I should know how to use an assistant. And of course, that will bring the capabilities to all the developers, the services, that will make it more efficient and comfortable for them. So yeah, I do want an enabler that gives a common layer to every service, and that lets users be confident. How do I discover what I can do and what I can't do? What does it know about me? How does privacy work? All of these things. I don't want 100,000 different answers. I want one answer.
Okay, great.
All
right. So Ron, you have two options here. You can answer the original question. What's keeping voice AI from becoming the next great computing platform? Or maybe you'll challenge that question on its face, which would not be unusual for you when I ask you questions. Or you can respond to what Adam just said. So go for it.
I'll do both. So I start where Adam started, which is a big problem with voice assistants is the user's need for a mental model. In fact, not to knock Siri, I think it was a fantastic breakthrough, but Siri was hard to use for me because I didn't always have the mental model of what it was able to do. I even think Apple, maybe even the days before Apple for Siri, but I'm sure during Apple's reign with Siri, they changed some of the functions early on. So what might have been a feature of Siri before was suppressed for a period of time or eliminated. And so even, I'm supposed to be a pretty sophisticated, very aware user of voice services because of history in the industry, but I couldn't necessarily form a mental model of what was expected when I said something to Siri or anything else for that matter. So I totally agree. But my answer is a little different. I mean, I get why Adam's proposing this horizontal layer because it sort of is meant to deal with the constraints of the technology. And what the other way to answer it would be, let's surpass the constraints of the technology that exists today with a more powerful technology. Now, that takes a lot of work and time and development. But if you had a more intelligent, and I hesitate to use the word, but AI layer that could interpret whatever you said in the right way so that you didn't have to have any mental model other than the way you talk, for example, to a human being or to an assistant, then you wouldn't need to have this industry agreement or a standardization about user interface. So maybe we're on the path to that for sure. Maybe we're not there yet is probably one way to say it. And that might be the enabler. I mean, that Adam's way of doing it could get us there if the industry forces lined up to create that circumstance. But I didn't hear Adam saying, I don't have any vision that there's any force in the market that's going to make that happen exactly today. But now let me answer your question or the invitation you said to challenge the question. I guess my cynic says, well, why aren't all the other next universal computing platforms winning either? And by the way, how many universal computing platforms are we going to have? So let me go back historically. When I met SRI, that 1993 story, actually had an amazing experience. I knew from my prior days a guy that was a key executive at the startup company Go. And Go was the pioneer, according to the venture world and the founders and the vision of a platform called Penn Computing. And the promise was, even John Doerr, Kleiner Perkins, Penn Computing is the next universal computing platform. So why didn't that work? But I don't want to dissect Penn Computing. I'll just tell you what Randy Commissar, who later went on and did a lot of interesting things at Kleiner, told me was, why don't you find something that has the power of Penn Computing to change the world? Don't just settle for. I was in search of a startup activity.
Right.
Earlier. He said, and I said, well, I don't know. I'm stuck with this speech recognition thing. That's the best I can come up with. And it's a little grandiose to imagine that I'm going to find a startup technology team that wants to engage with me that is going to change the world. Now, proudly, I say, with the benefit of hindsight and history here, I think I actually did. I mean, we have, and we're in that process. Funny to laugh about pen computing as the next great compute platform, and then challenge speech as, well, wait a minute, what's holding speech back? So I think we're on our way to speech realizing its full value, but I'm going to challenge your question even further. I don't buy the premise of a next great computing platform, because I'll just name 3 or 4 right now that are all have been promised to be, and they're not. The most recent one was chatbots. Chatbots in the messenger platform ecosystem was going to be the next great computing platform. I don't even know what that means, computing. Computing is something to me that goes on at the CPU and the source code level. And we're talking about user experience and content and services and all that. So I don't even think it's computing, but that part I won't challenge for today. Let's say we're all talking about computing platforms. The one right before that was the next great computing platform was virtual reality. And when Mark Zuckerberg bought Oculus, he declared it's the next great computing platform. And all we had to do was put on one of the goggle headsets and get nauseous to realize it wasn't the next great.
Okay, well, wait a second. Let me interject here, Ron. So I get it. There's a lot of examples of this. I think there's a lot of people have talked about voice assistants and the AI layer with the voice interface is being this Star Trek-like platform, right? It's the computer in Star Trek. It's all the intelligence that could go into anything from a robot to a fixed ambient device. Thinking of that as platform level. So yeah, there's a lot of things that have failed. And if you look at VR, for example, it's a perfect example. Chatbots is a little muddier because there's overlap with voice assistants in terms of the technology, at least more and more there is. But let's just talk about VR. It might become that. It's not there yet. I've always been a little skeptical of it due to other trends. But just because that failed, I don't know that there's like a perfect correlation here that it says, hey, did people think like VR would be, could have the level of impact from an industry standpoint, or like commerce-wise, or like in the economy, as something like voice? And so I think that's really the question, and maybe the question is whether we need one, but we do have clearly defined platforms in the web and mobile.
Yeah, and it goes back beyond that. I mean, so if you really think of like the personal computing. So yeah. I say that a new interface paradigm. So I'm not about computing platform, so low level, but as an interface paradigm, a new one emerges about like clockwork, right? So 84 was maybe the graphical interface, 85, something like that. About 10 years later, there was the web, and there was an enhancement. So I used to have to use programs on my desk. The web let me use computing from computers around the world.
Right.
About 10 years, so maybe that was 94, 95, the web starting.
Yeah. Mosaic.
So then you go, 2007 with mobile and the iPhone. So that's like, okay, 12 years. So it's like going, okay, 10, 11, 12 years. And now I could do computing, not just at my desk using computers anywhere. I could walk around, I could walk down the street. I was now freed from being behind the desk, right? So I do think voice has the potential to be, a voice assistant has a potential to be a next paradigm. I do think about now, so this is 13 years past the App Store. This is around the right time for something to emerge. I think that's as ready to emerge as anything. However, I'm scared for the voice industry that I believe if we go too fragmented, if we don't solve some of the discovery or the mental model that Ron talked about, we're never going to achieve that level, and that opportunity will pass. I will say one comment to Ron's point about Siri in the old days. The original Siri app had over 90% end user task success rate. When people talk about the original app, they're like, oh, I loved it. It was so much better. Why was it better? It was because we did a better job at allowing a user to discover a mental model. And so there was a certain design that the user said things that worked. And when we went to Apple, Steve Jobs, and I'm like, we need this feature. He said, no, we'll just teach users what to say through commercials and things like that. But of course, with voice and without this discovery mechanism, you get this, very fuzzy mental model of what Siri could do. And I think that was actually a mistake by Steve. Many of the things he got absolutely right. I think this was a mistake that discovery got lost, and that has greatly hurt the voice assistant industry since that, because no one knows what they can say and do, and they're afraid to venture out and expand their model when there are methods that can make that easier. Anyway, so some comments that I do think voice can be a paradigm. I do think augmented reality could be a paradigm, not for this decade, but maybe 1 or 2 iterations out from now.
Right.
But we're looking for a new way that we can interact with every service in the world, all content in the world. And, I think voice assistant is best positioned to do that if they do the right things.
Okay, Ron, I'm going to give you the last word here before we go to some Q&A, because we're running long, but this has been so fun. So we're going to keep it going.
I love what the last thing Adam said, because I was going to go there myself. Let's just play a game. I posit that maybe augmented reality is the next UI form or even computing platform of the moment, and speech comes after. That is to say, when we want to have the full natural AI that lets speech be unconstrained, and therefore you don't need this formal, structured mental model. And like a good venture capitalist investor, I have to brag about our best investment, which is Niantic Labs, which launched the Pokemon Go game, which downloaded more apps, more users than any app in the history of gaming or mobile platforming, and monetizes incredibly well. And while people think the fad has faded, actually Pokemon Go goes on quite strongly still. And it's a template for a integrated experience where augmented contributions to our realities enrich the base world that we're living in. And by the way, Brett knows that I think that evolves to virtual humans, and that's maybe the highest order use of voice recognition and voice synthesis for that matter. So I think we're on this path through the augmented reality phase of this, where voice will become even more and more important. But I guess the breakthrough will come when you don't have to have a constrained or rigid mental model for it.
All right. Well, that's awesome. You guys are great. And by the way, everybody, we're going to continue this conversation on Clubhouse afterwards. I'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But I did want to get to just a couple quick questions, because I did promise to do that. The first one comes from Michelle Call, and she wanted to ask each of you how you see voice commerce evolving.
I'll start. So I do think, again, if there's common infrastructure, commerce can really take off through voice and voice assistants. We did certain things at Bixby at Samsung. Even though it was still in early days, there were partners of us who said, we are selling more physical goods through Bixby than we are on all of our other voice competitors, deployments combined. So I do think there are just engineering technical things like, making the credit card be part of your voice experience, so you don't have to enter it and you can use it widely across every service.
Right.
Things like that. I do think right now voice assistants, it's the digital goods that are going to be much easier to purchase than physical goods. It'll take some time for the physical goods to get there, but I do think we can cross that hump. And I've ordered a lot of different things through voice assistants, dating through all the way back to the early version of Siri and Viv Labs and at Bixby Samsung.
I'll throw something out there that'll come out in a podcast in a couple of weeks. Bahubali Shetty runs a company called Tiny Chef, and they have an Alexa skill in India. It's called Sanjeev Kapoor Recipes, and they implemented the Amazon Alexa or the Alexa shopping cart feature where people can place an order. So that they're doing a recipe, they can promote something, the skill can promote something, people can just buy it right there. Essentially, it takes them to the .com part of Amazon, or .in, I guess, part of Amazon, to close that, and then puts them right back in the skill where they continue their recipe, but they can actually buy things. And actually the conversion rates he's talking to me about are much higher than the other channels that I've seen. So we're talking about very engaged, as long as it's frictionless. In that case, it's Amazon Pay. And I think Bixby, you guys were working with some things for Samsung Pay as well. Mm-hmm. It's already in there. And so it is frictionless and it pushes you back in. But I think it's a really interesting use case. Ron, your thoughts? Did you have anything on this, or you want to go to the next one?
We trademarked the moniker V-commerce in the Nuance days, but we were about 25 years too early.
Yeah.
So, but what I react when I hear the question is just this one statistic about e-commerce, which is that Amazon only has about 4% of the retail revenue flow, in the world at large, but it has 50% of the e-commerce world, the e-retail world. And so when you think about how does voice commerce take hold, I think you've got to think first about Amazon, because there's Amazon and then there's everybody else. And by the way, Jeff Bezos is pretty brilliant. And I think the Echo product line is an amazing step forward. And, it's ironic when you go back, we were talking about multimodal, Adam referred to it, in the 90s. And what Amazon did that's mind-blowing is they did a voice interface and a voice assistant experience with no screen to start. It didn't need to be multimodal. Meant keyboard and screen and voice and mouse and whatever. In the Echo devices I have all through my home, it's just voice. It's an amazing thing, and I do buy stuff, not as much as maybe Amazon would like me to, but I think it's an Amazon world when you talk about e-commerce, and probably even more so when you talk about v-commerce.
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right. So a couple quick things. I was going to do at least another question, but we're coming to the top of the hour and I want to make sure that I'm respectful of everybody. So, but we anticipated this. So we have overtime. The after show is going to be on Clubhouse. We'll open that up in about 5 minutes. So people should go there. Adam and Ron are both going to join me on stage. We'll bring some people up on stage. There's a couple of questions here that I'll get to. If you guys show up in Clubhouse, I'll bring you up. If not, ask the question to me at Brett Kinsella on Twitter. If you can't make Clubhouse, and I'll make sure we get your question answered. And we'll do a response that way. I thank you so much, everybody. So a couple different things. So this is the first one. Oh, one more thing. I promised to give this thing away. Let's see, go this way. Adam's on, and hey, there's some people who are Android and don't have access to Clubhouse, but with this thing, you could get on there. I'm going to announce the winner of this on the Clubhouse session. So definitely check that out. Even if you don't attend Clubhouse, but if you were here and you register and all that other things, you don't have to be there to win. You just had to be here to win. So I'll announce it. I'll also announce it on Twitter, and then we'll make sure we get you your iPad and you can enjoy that. And it's a little homage to Adam Shire here and his history in the industry. The next thing I should tell you about is we're going to do this again. This has been pretty exciting. So I'm going to move this way a little bit. So next week, we've got Sanjay Dhawan and Simon Uringer. So from Cerence, the number one company in terms of market share for voice assistants in the car. That's the old Nuance Automotive. So Ron will know something about the lineage there. Sanjay, he's a public company CEO, and he's going to come to our Voicebot Live next week. And so that'll be very interesting to hear about his perspective. And then Simon, he's head of voice assistant and voice technology for the car. He was running a significant group here in the US, moved up and back to Germany. And BMW has been one of the most aggressive and the most advanced companies in this space around voice adoption in the car, really rethinking the driving experience. So I'm really excited to bring that to you next week. Same time, 12 noon Pacific time. You'll see the other times on there. You should register again, because we're going to have a cool giveaway as well next week. So go to voicebot.ai live, voicebot.ai/live, and you can register for that as well. And so everyone should go to Clubhouse. I'm at Brett Kinsella on on Clubhouse. You can look for us. We'll be probably be in your hallway. If you're following me, you can search. Definitely sign up for episode 2 and join us next week. And Ron, Adam, thank you so much for being my first guest on Voicebot Live. You were amazing. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation in a couple minutes where we can break this down a little bit more, because I've got some comebacks for you, Adam.
All right. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, everybody, for being here today. We really appreciate it.